So this is the last lesson in the control and communication topic. We've already looked at the nervous system, how information flows through it. We've looked at the brain and then reflex actions as well. And in this lesson, we're going to be looking at the endocrine system, which is all about the hormones. And this is another way that body parts can communicate with each other. So we're going to look at the function of an endocrine gland, looking at what a hormone is and what it does. We're going to look at how hormones only affect specific body parts, and we're also going to look at one specific example of how hormones control something, and that is blood sugar. So what do you already know about hormones? What are they made of? Where are they made in a cell? What do they do? How do they travel around the body, and why are they specific? So it's important to maybe dispel one or two kind of myths about hormones. And one myth is that hormones are they're only involved in puberty, reproduction. And that's not true at all. So hormones are heavily involved in the control of reproduction and control of puberty, but they actually have a lot of other jobs as well. And in fact, probably the most famous hormone, or the most well-known hormone, is insulin. And insulin has got absolutely nothing to do with reproduction at all, or puberty. It is to do with blood sugar. So we'll look at that in a bit more detail later. But to answer a few questions here before we go on, we need to know that hormones are made of protein. We've looked at examples of proteins already. The best example we've looked at is enzymes. And there's actually some similarities between enzymes and hormones, which we'll see today. So if they're made of protein, we should then be able to answer the second question as well, which is where are they made in a cell? And all proteins are made in the ribosomes of cells. So what do hormones do? Well, they're involved in communication. How do they travel around the body? Well, unlike nerve impulses, they don't travel through nerves. They actually travel in the bloodstream. So all hormones are just carried in the bloodstream around the body. Why are they specific? Well, like enzymes, they are specific, and it's because of their shape. And we'll look at this in a little bit more detail shortly. So specifically, where are they made? Well, we've said that they are made in the ribosomes of cells, but hormones are only made in cells that are found in specific body parts, which we call endocrine glands. There's a huge number of endocrine glands in the body. And it's important to know the names of perhaps a few of these. So some hormones are made in the brain, specific parts of the brain, which are called glands. So we've got the pineal gland towards the back of the brain. We've got the pituitary gland, which is one of the largest endocrine glands in the body, which is just below the front of the brain. We've got the hypothalamus, which is a section in the midbrain. So all of these are endocrine glands. They will produce hormones. Further down the body, we've got the thyroid gland and the parathyroid glands, which are found in the throat. Underneath that, we've got the thymus. We've got the adrenal glands, which are located here, just sort of next to the kidneys. The adrenal glands produce a hormone called adrenaline, which you've maybe heard of before. That is linked to control of blood sugar. We've got the pancreas, which is found here in the middle, up next to the digestive system. The pancreas produces the hormones insulin and glucagon, which we'll look at in more detail later. Again, they're involved in blood sugar control. Then we've got the reproductive glands. So the ovaries produce estrogen, which is one of the female reproductive hormones. They also produce progesterone. The testes is the male reproductive gland, and this one produces testosterone, which is involved in controlling sperm production, amongst other things. So there are lots of these endocrine glands located throughout the body, and they all release different hormones, and these hormones are going to have specific jobs. They will tell other body parts what they are supposed to be doing. Because they're chemical messengers, they just travel in the bloodstream. So these glands will just release whatever they produce into the blood, and then the bloodstream will carry those hormones along with all the other things like glucose, oxygen, around the body to the various different parts. So how exactly do they work then? So they are very specific. So hormones will be telling one specific body part to do one particular job. So the gland, the endocrine gland, will have cells that are secreting the hormone that they produce. They just enter the bloodstream, you can see here, into this capillary or this blood vessel, and then they will just travel through the blood. Now, when they travel through the blood, they will pass by lots and lots and lots of different organs and cell types within the body, but they won't have any effect on those cells. They will only have an effect on target cells, the cells that are supposed to receive that particular hormone. Now, any cell that has the correct receptor will respond to the arrival of this particular hormone. So we can see the hormone arriving here. These target cells do have receptors that will fit this particular hormone. And it's a little bit like how enzymes will fit their specific substrates. So if we have another look, I'll look at a different picture here. So this gives us a slightly better idea. So this is the cell membrane of the target cell. And this is the hormone that was released by an endocrine gland. And we can see that the shape of the hormone matches the shape of this receptor. The shapes are said to be complementary. And this is exactly the same principle as how a substrate and the enzyme's active site are complementary. So they are specific. So this target cell here has a receptor that fits the shape of this particular hormone. And therefore, this target cell will respond in some way to the arrival of this hormone. We'll look at an example of this later, where we'll look at how insulin and glucagon have an effect on liver cells, but they are released from the pancreas. That is the endocrine gland that produces it. So we will look at that again later. But it's really important that we are quite clear on how hormones are specific to particular target cells. If you're asked about that, you would need to reference the fact that the target cells have a receptor, and that that receptor will have a shape that is complementary to the hormone. But other cells in the body, if they do not have this receptor, then they will just completely ignore the hormone. It will not have any effect on them at all. So what are similarities and differences between nervous communication and hormone communication? So this whole topic is about controlling communication, so we need to be able to compare these two. So nervous communication is much, much faster. These are impulses that are traveling along neurons at very, very high speeds. They are also very targeted. So the impulse will be sent from one body part, probably the brain, down to a target effector, such as a muscle, and it will happen in less than a second. That message will fly along that neuron, those neurons, and they will get there really, really quick. Whereas hormonal communication is traveling through the blood, so it is a lot slower to get from the endocrine gland to the target cell or target organ, but quite often that is deliberate. We don't want the changes to happen really, really quickly. For example, when we start to go through puberty, it is because hormones are being released by the hypothalamus in the brain. We wouldn't want changes to happen in split seconds. It just doesn't work that way. So sometimes it is beneficial to have the body respond more slowly, and that is where hormones would be used. Other differences, a nervous impulse is an impulse, it's an electrical impulse traveling through a neuron, whereas hormones are proteins that have been produced in an endocrine gland and then travel through the blood to the target cell. So there are some differences, but ultimately both nervous communication and hormonal communication is just that. It is communication between two body parts, messages that are being sent. Now, as they are specific, there are many different hormones that carry different messages. Now, there's a whole load here. The good news is that you do not need to know all of these. You maybe have heard of one or two. So for example, adrenal glands producing adrenaline. We've got potentially, you have possibly heard of things like estrogen, progesterone, testosterone in males. The only one that you are going to need to be aware of in this topic, or that you're going to need to be able to describe, are these ones which we can see here. So we need to know the two hormones that the pancreas produces, which are called insulin and glucagon, and we need to know what the release of these hormones is actually doing to the body. So we'll have a wee look at that now. Let's have a wee look at how blood sugar is controlled. So hormones are responsible for telling the liver what it needs to do based on how much glucose is in the bloodstream. So what I want you to imagine is that you've just had something to eat. Actually, go and do that. Go and get yourself something to eat. You can have a biscuit or something. So you have something to eat. And when you do that, you digest the food. And once the food's digested, that will break it down into its individual molecules. A lot of that will be glucose. And this, remember, is the main fuel that our body needs for aerobic respiration. So once you've digested your food, it is absorbed into the blood in the small intestine. And once that glucose enters the blood, the pancreas, one of its main jobs is to, if you like, scan the blood and work out what is the blood glucose concentration. If it gets too high, that can actually cause us problems later in life. It can lead to things like type 2 diabetes. So we don't want really, really high glucose concentrations in the blood. We have a kind of set level that it should be kept at. So when you've just eaten, the glucose levels in the blood are going to increase. So we'll have a little look at this picture here. So I want you to imagine that we've got our normal glucose concentration in the blood. We've just eaten a meal, which means that the blood glucose concentration is going to go up. Okay, this is detected by receptor cells in, not the liver, but the pancreas. Okay, so the pancreas detects that our blood sugar level has just gone up because we've just eaten something. Now, the pancreas responds to that by trying to get this increased blood glucose back down to normal. So what happens is the pancreas starts to produce more insulin. Okay. That insulin makes its way through the bloodstream to the liver. And when the liver cell receptors pick up some of this insulin, it causes them to respond. And what happens is they then start to produce enzymes which will store some of that excess glucose as glycogen. So what they're doing is they're taking glucose and they are building it up into glycogen, but they're only doing that because they have been directed to by this insulin arriving at the liver. And once they've done that, once they store some of this excess glucose, that means that the blood glucose concentration will drop back to normal. Okay. Now, it may be at normal, but we've had our food, we're now getting on with the day. We're being active, and as a result of that, we're starting to use up some of this glucose that is in the blood. That's being used up by cells that are doing aerobic respiration. And eventually what's going to happen is the blood glucose level is going to start to fall. And it will decrease, and when that decrease occurs, again, it's detected by these receptor cells in the pancreas that are just monitoring our blood glucose level. So they've seen that the blood glucose level is starting to fall, and what they start to do now is they start to produce less insulin and more glucagon. And glucagon is basically it's a hormone that is doing the opposite of insulin. So it's a bit of a balancing act here. The pancreas realizes that our blood glucose level's fallen, so it doesn't want insulin out there, it wants more glucagon. This glucagon is detected by the liver. It is the target cells, so it has receptors for glucagon as well as insulin. And what happens is the liver then starts to turn some of that stored glycogen back into glucose. So we're now eating away at the store that we just made earlier. That glycogen goes back into glucose, which means that the blood glucose level will then start to go back up to normal. And that is how we control our blood sugar concentration. Now, eventually we could get to the point where we have no glycogen left. We've used up all of that store and our blood glucose is still getting used up for aerobic respiration, so this will start to drop again. And in this situation, if we've not got anything left in the store, we will still go through this process, but the only way to get our blood glucose concentration back up is to go to the fridge, go and get something to eat. Okay, we do eventually have to top up our fuel, that's why we do need to eat. And that eventually we will eat so much that we can start to build up this store of glycogen again. Okay, so in the blood glucose example, the endocrine gland is the place where the hormones are being produced, and that is the pancreas. So the pancreas is the endocrine gland that's producing insulin or glucagon, depending on our blood sugar level. The target tissue is the liver, because the liver is going to respond to either of these two hormones by stimulating the correct enzymes. So if we've got a high blood sugar level, it's the insulin that's been released from the pancreas, and that means that glucose gets turned into glycogen. But if we've got a low blood sugar level, then it's going to be the opposite way around. The pancreas is going to release glucagon to tell the liver to stimulate the enzyme to convert it back from glycogen into glucose to try and bring our blood sugar level up. Okay. And that is it. So you should now be able to complete pages 5 to 7 in your summary notes for control and communication, and you should also be able to attempt the remaining past paper questions which are in this booklet as well. If you have any questions at all about the endocrine system, make sure you ask your teacher, but you need to be able to state what is the function of an endocrine gland, what is a hormone, what does it do. You need to be able to explain why hormones are specific and why they only affect their target cells. And you also need to be able to understand the role of hormones in controlling blood sugar when our sugar level goes up or when our sugar level goes down. But that is it for control and communication. If you have any questions, get in touch with your teacher. You can stop the video now.